I do want to tell you all, before we begin, about a couple of upcoming events. There is a St. Louis abortion rights rally this Saturday, 12 p.m. at Keener Plaza. And if you go to our website, there's instructions if you'd like to meet up with a group to go together. Go up to our website, you can find information about that. We also have a fantastic event, Rock the Boat, on Thursday, June 2nd. This one is a virtual event. So again, there's information on our website on how you would join that. And that's, I believe, in the evening. And on that line, I would like to remind everyone, we have voter registration packets on the back table, and Michelle is more than happy to hand you just as many as you'd like to take. There you go, there's an example, and it's very easy. They basically put them together, put a stamp on it, or a few stamps, and mail. So I'd encourage everyone to take part in that. To our virtual attendees, we are asking that if you have a question, please put it in the chat. And we do have someone, Ellen, our program director, is managing those questions, so we'll make sure everybody's questions get answered. Those of you that are here today in person, we're asking that you save your questions till the end of our speaker's remarks. And then you'll see the center podium. There is a mic like this one there, or there will be, and we ask you just to ask your questions there so that everyone can hear them. We had some trouble last time hearing questions from attendees. Let's see if I got everything. Oh, of course, I forgot the most important thing. We encourage anyone who's not yet a member of Women's Voices Race to please join us. Very easy to do on our website. And please keep checking the website. There is so much information. It blows me away how much we educate and how much really current information is up there and changing all the time. So just make it a habit to check into our website every day or two. And with that, I'm very happy to introduce Mary Schumann. She will be introducing our speaker. Thank you all again for being here. Yeah, it's coming in.
Okay, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, maybe this one will stick on. This evening we will explore the St. Louis Pacific legacies of the enslavement of 70 people who, over a period of 40 years, helped establish the Jesuit mission in St. Louis, and who literally built and sustained the former St. Stanislaus Seminary and St. Louis University with their involuntary labor. Well, exploration of this subject will touch on the paradox of religious institutions enslaving people and on some of what happened to the descendants of those 70 enslaved people. Our speaker will focus on the aftermath of slavery upon the city of St. Louis area. Our guest speaker, Father Jeffrey Harrison, has been deeply immersed in this issue after spending several years as a researcher and currently as project coordinator for the Slavery, History, Memory, and Reconciliation Project at St. Louis University. This project began in 2016 as a joint effort of the Jesuits in the Central and Southern Province, and St. Louis University has identified generations of descendants. The family story is told by living descendants, along with historical records, help reveal the human legacies of those who were enslaved. Father Harrison's work is taken into many parts of the world in a wide variety of roles. As St. Louis leader, he has had assignments in Kenya, Sudan, Myanmar, and most recently Belize. But he also served on faculties of the SNAP and St. Lucie high schools here in St. Louis and the Jesuit school and high school in Denver. When in St. Louis, he lives at St. Matthew's Apostle Parish in the Ville. Father Harrison has a BA in philosophy and an MA in history from St. Louis University, an MA's in divinity and in theology from the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley. Please give a warm welcome to Father Jeff Harrison.
And I have a favor to ask. My grandmother always said, a gentleman does not remove his jacket in the presence of ladies.
Please do, please do.
I didn't expect May 12th to be quite as warm. Okay, thank you.
No. We're gonna have him not use the room mic if we can, because it's picking up the sound on the Zoom mic and echoing for the people on Zoom. So we're gonna try that and see if you all can hear him without it.
So if you can't hear me, just give me a wave and I'll turn it off. I am realizing I taught high school for about 30 years altogether. And every August you had to get your teacher's voice back. And I haven't been teaching for a while. So this will be a bit of a trial to see. Before I begin, I want to thank Dr. Kelly Schmidt, who was our lead researcher and who just ran this whole thing. Without her, this would not have happened. And she's no longer with our project. She's moved on to a job at WashU, but I always want to get her out front because she was really the animator of this and then pulled it all together. As I said, I taught history for many years. And when I had a degree in European history with a minor in US, but I didn't teach US. When I came home from Africa the first time, they said, oh yeah, we don't have any openings. We want you to teach US history. And I said, well, I don't really regard it as history. I mean, it's still journalism.
Yeah.
And, but okay, we'll try. This was in 1996. Well, it turned out, of course, every day is American history. And that was one of the frustrations is they keep making more of it and they don't give us more time to teach it. Looking out of this room, I'll bet if you got to World War II,
We did well.
you were doing well. And since we'd all grown up on the movies, we kind of knew it anyway, at least the John Wayne version of that. Well, that's 80 years ago, and they haven't given us another minute more to teach it. And so that's a real frustration in trying to put all that in. And so now going back with this project, and part of our job is not just to do the research, but to try to leaven it into our schools, our parishes, our retreat, whatever is going on, because they all are based in slavery. It's an uphill battle to try, oh, now do I throw out, World War I or what happens? But at any rate, which is a way of apology because this is going to be fire hose and probably not going to get through everything. But if I need to slow down or something you don't quite get, give me a little wave and we'll back up a bit. So as I was coming into teaching this, again, cast your mind back, probably your junior year, your US history course. I'm not seeing a whole lot of, oh, that was great. And I had that same feeling coming into it. So I said, I can't do it that way. One thing and then another thing and then another thing and then this president and that war and on and on and on. And so I started reading about this and how to do this and trying to bring in the voices that aren't there. And again, I wasn't in your history class, but I'm guessing that slaves showed up. Probably there was a thing on the Middle Passage. Oh, and then there was that Civil War thing. Yeah, and throw that in with Reconstruction. And then pretty much everybody was fine until that lady on the bus got up in 1955 and started causing all that trouble. And then, okay, then we fixed it all in the 60s. Yeah, not really. How about ladies, huh? Well, you had Pocahontas. Sure, you had her. And then, oh yeah, you got to vote in 1920.
No, only if you were white.
Right.
Indeed. But the voices aren't there. The experiences aren't there. And so trying to go back and recapture that is very difficult because at the time those voices weren't honored. and they weren't encouraged. There are some things that you have to, and it's easier now, thank God, you know, of course, with the internet and stuff, but so much has been uncovered. And so we have been able to do that. So what I always try to do to my students is show something that's going on now. You know, I wake up in the morning and hear the radio, oh, today the Supreme Court decided X. And then, okay, now I can fit that into this thing from whatever, the Civil War. Or whatever. So I'm going to do that to y'all. Tell me if you've heard of a place called Hadley Township.
Yes.
Just get, I can't, yeah. So do you know where it is?
Yes. Right down the road.
No.
Isn't Hadley Township?
We're sitting in it. Well, you're
Yeah.
sitting in it. I'm
Yeah,
standing in it. Yes, Hadley Township was an African-American community that ran from the other side of 40 to, I'm not quite sure how, that's wet. Is that south? How south? But from Laclede Station to Hanley. And it was founded in 1907 by a company called the Evans Howard Fire Brick Company. And where Brentwood Square is, there was a quarry. You wonder why the land goes up behind there? Yep, there was a quarry. And they made fire bricks there, just like the hill. The Italians moved to the hill to dig out the clay down where River de Paris. But of course, African Americans weren't allowed to live here at the turn of the century. So somebody from Evans Howard made a little deal with Richmond Heights and got this area just for African American workers. There was no public transportation out from the city, so that was how this started. And they built a series of homes. They were called 2x2s. Because they were put, you know, they had a common wall and then 2 rooms. And of course, outhouse, you know, no plumbing, you had a well, that sort of thing, which was not that uncommon around 1900 in the St. Louis area, even in the city. But yeah, very simple stuff. And they had this area. And they had a school called Lincoln Elementary School, eventually became also a high school. And, you know, not rich by any means, but people built the house bigger, put a porch on, put another room, that kind of thing. And darn if they didn't make a community. Well, then in 1959, we had this, maybe I don't want to judge anybody, but maybe remember this. They called it an expressway, the Red Feather Expressway. And it ran all the way from Vandevenner to Clayton. Do you ever wonder why 40 goes like this at Clayton? It's because it went like that. That's where it stopped. And of course, even today, everybody's like, oh, curve, what must stop? I don't know why we have to stop when we get to that point, but we do. Well, they said, wouldn't it be nice if it went further on? And then, well, where should it go? And this is right when the whole highway system, Eisenhower and all that is coming in. And if you take a map of St. Louis from those times, almost every highway went through an African-American area. So that part of Hadley Township got taken for Highway 40. And it's been repeated all over. And if we have time, I'll go into some more detail other places. As long as you take a little bit, well, maybe a little more. In 1996, 97% of Richmond Heights citizens voted to build this place. So it was hugely popular. And if you look up the website, it says, what's the living room of Richmond Heights? Now, should we not have done? Well, those are all questions, right? But the people that lived here at the time didn't have a choice. But they still had this area to the south. Well, till Hanley kind of became a big deal. And then there was the Lowe's and the Home Depot. But darn it, one of those is in Maplewood and the other's in Brentwood, not in Richmond Heights. So what if this area behind Hanley could be developed? These are words we should always watch out for.
That's right.
Developed, urban renewal, all these kind of things. And so they announced in the late 90s that, yeah, we're looking at this area to redevelop. Now, if you own a home there, are you going to keep fixing it up? Are you going to try to sell it right away? Are you going to hold on and hope? Because this thing died 3 times over a period of about 12 years. You hold on to it, hoping against hope. Can you take out a loan on that house to put your kid through college or to medical care or any of that kind of stuff? And so, not trying to put any of this on you, but slavery happened a long time ago. My family wasn't even here then. I get that a lot. I said, oh, so you don't bother with George Washington and all? Oh, well, yeah, no. I said, well, you weren't here. Take the good stuff, ignore the bad. Huh? That's what our history books, happy history for white people. Yeah, we had a few problems, but boy, we straightened them out, and now we just keep going forward and forward and on and on and on, which is not helpful for anybody, especially white people. They had George Washington. How come we got, and take your pick, I'm not going to say who, but has anybody felt like we have George Washington in the last 20 years as our president? He had just as much controversy, just as much people against him as anybody does today. They wrote scurrilous things, and right on down, Adam Jefferson, all the people we hold up so big. And so when we take that away, we lose an understanding of the time. And it looks like, oh, they were lucky. They had Washington or Lincoln or whoever, and we're stuck with, again, whichever side you want to go on. Not true. Every generation had its challenges, had its faults, had its problems that they had to deal with. I mean, when you say, well, what was the revolution about? Most people would say, well, taxes are the role of government. Well, thank God we settled that. Different ways and different things, but yeah, we keep coming back. Sorry, I'm gonna have to keep doing it. Back to that. So, Meacham Park, North Webster, Kinloch, Elmwood Park, Clayton. Clayton had a big African American community on a little street called Bonhome, which they called Bonhomie. There's a woman, she has a thing on there. She lived at 7773 Bonhome. Now, when I was in high school, what was it, 7777? Remember? The top of the sevens. That was elegant and right next to where her house was. And the same kind of pattern. Different methods sometimes, but yes. A place where African Americans live is expendable. And often it was called blighted and all these other kind of things. Oh, they don't have sewers, they said in the city. Well, gosh, last time I looked, I wasn't in charge of putting in my own sewer. Who did that? Well, the city did that. They just didn't do it there. And then they said, okay. So let me, having kind of put that now thing out there, let me back up to tell you a little bit about our situation as Jesuits. So the Jesuits came to what is now the United States. I say that because we were in Canada many decades before that, in 1633 in Maryland. And that was a Catholic colony. England at that time wasn't real thrilled about Catholics. And so Lord Baltimore, start to see the connections, said to the king, can I get this place? And we'll take all the Catholics away from England and you won't have to worry about us anymore. That was the idea. It didn't quite come true. But he came and he brought 2 Jesuits with him. And the leader was Andrew White. And in those days, you're coming to this place that in European minds would be undeveloped, and then how are we going to live here and what are we going to do? So they would make land grants. So you have this, it's huge sometimes. Here, you have this 1,000 acres, and then you worked it. Well, if any of you, I'm a city boy, but I understand farming is not that easy. And especially in the old days with the plow and all that. And so they brought over indentured servants, people who signed up for 7 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, to work the land. That didn't really work out. And so unfortunately, just like the rest of the United States at that time, or it was the colony at that time, imported African Americans to do this work, and the Jesuits were right in that. And the idea was we'd have this farm, the enslaved would work it, and the Jesuits would then be free to go out. The whole idea in the beginning was to catechize the Native Americans. And you're going to see, if you haven't already seen from yesterday's news, you're going to see more about this coming up. But the idea was, okay, just like every place else, India and South America will go in and deal with these Native people, learn their languages, and be able to write down the Bible and catechism and this kind of stuff and bring them to Christianity. The pattern in what would become the United States was often that. And then time went by and they left or they got sick and died. And well, wouldn't it be better if we had a school? That's what we're really good at, Jesuits. We do schools. And so, but in Europe, we weren't allowed to charge tuition in our schools. You'd get some duke or earl or somebody to, give you land and give you stuff to make the school go. Well, we didn't have that here. And so we went back, we have this, and we have the enslaved people to work, and in Maryland, it was mostly tobacco. So a place called Georgetown was opened up under those auspices. We had a novitiate, which is the first 2 years of Jesuit training, but it was filled with Belgians. And it turns out the Americans and the Belgians did not get along very well at all. And so the Americans went, we've got to get rid of this novitiate, meaning the Belgians. And there was a man who was connected to Georgetown at that time, who had just been made bishop of the Louisiana Territory, which that Louisiana purchased, so that's all the way from the Gulf up to Canada and out to the Rockies. His name was William Valentine de Burgh. And he heard about this, and he said, I'll take those guys. I have a farm up in Florissant. They can have that and start an Indian school, still with the Native American thing. But he put in the contract that he had with us, very specific, at least 5 enslaved workers for the farm. And so in May of 1823, 12 Jesuits and 6 enslaved persons, 3 couples, set out from Maryland. Now, those couples were all related to the enslaved that were already there. But they were forced to go. They had to leave their relatives. We haven't made all the connections, but certainly parents and brothers and sisters and people that they would have been close to, but no, off we go. And there's a whole long trip. They got to Wheeling, West Virginia by foot, and then you were supposed to hire a pilot for the flatboats. Well, Jesuits don't need pilots, so the head guy bought a book on how to pilot a flatboat.
Jeez.
Now, when you're going down the Ohio River and you see something up ahead and you start looking for that in the book, that's probably not. So they had all kinds of, how they got here in one piece is a miracle. But they did. And they were installed in the farm in Florissant, and that was the plan. The African Americans will work the farm, and the Jesuits will start working first with the local, into the Iowas and the Osage and these different groups, and then eventually out to Kansas and Nebraska, which weren't called that then. But so these 6 enslaved were brought and put to work, hard work, making a farm. I mean, it was called a farm, but it wasn't really all fixed and broken and land developed. By 1829, they said we need more, and Father Van Quickenborn, who was the head, went back to Maryland and brought back, we think it was about 16, they didn't really keep good records, and 16 to 20 persons. Among them was a young girl named Matilda Hawkins. And Matilda left family back in the DC area, Georgetown, in that area in Maryland, and came here, and eventually married a man named George Tyler, who worked for another. St. Louis was very small and very Catholic in those days. Everybody was kind of, and so very often you would, the next farm or this guy who was in, no, I'm looking for a wife or, or whatever it might be. So they married, and they had 5 boys and 2 girls. Both the girls died in early childhood, but the boys grew up, and Matilda started saving money. Now, this is where we have to understand Missouri slavery, and I will not for a second try to give the opinion it was nicer, but it was different than, think of Gone with the Wind, huge plantation with 200 slaves all picking cotton. Well, we didn't have cotton here, except down in the boot field. And so when you have like wheat and corn, it's not as labor intensive. So there's a lot of downtime. And so people would borrow and hire out enslaved persons to other places to do domestic work, to take out some trees, whatever that kind of stuff was. So Missouri was never a huge slave state. I've got the numbers here. There were in 1830, there were about 3,000. 1860, 30 years later, there were only 4,300. So that's not a huge number. If you had 10 or 15 in Missouri, you were rich. And so people had household people to do the work, or the garden, that kind of thing. And so, as I say, it was very different. Plus, you were right on the border, Illinois and Iowa, free states. There were a fair number of free African Americans in St. Louis, where you would not have had that in a Georgia or Alabama. So people could see that. There was also the ability to, the enslaved had Saturday afternoons and Sundays off. So if you wanted to work harder, you could, Matilda eventually was a laundress and a seamstress. So I can imagine her, I'll do your laundry for you, whatever it might be, and get a few. So over time, she somehow, we still don't know exactly how, raised $300, which is $11,000 in today's dollars, and bought the freedom of herself and her youngest son, Charles. And then George he bought his freedom from her husband, bought his freedom from his enslaver. I always throw out the names just in case there's somebody in the room. It's in there, but I'll find it. Anyway, and they started saving. George was a drayman, a teamster. And so they started saving money, and that was in 1848. Within 10 years, they had made enough money to buy the freedom of their other 4 boys. It was unusual at the time. It's a real mystery to us how they managed to put that money together and hold on, because you were, even as a free person of color in St. Louis, you were really restricted. You had to be in by dark. You had at all times carry your papers with you, and if not, you were assumed to be a runaway, and you'd go right back into slavery. You could not meet together like in a church without a white person present to watch. There was all kinds of restrictions. You had to have a bond from a white person, so if you did get into trouble as a free person, they would be responsible for you because you'd be considered indigent. At any rate, they managed to do this at what must have been tremendous hardship. However, Charles, the youngest, turned out to be quite a guy. He started as a porter in a liquor business, Arch and Hold liquor business, and he's listed as a porter in 1870. By 1873, it's Archibald and Tyler. He's a partner. And 5 years later, it's Tyler. And so he was able to have it. The liquor business was you're running a saloon, basically, and then maybe a little shop next to it kind of thing. And as he grew and prospered, he got involved in politics. He was here's where I'm going to get. There was a group called the Exodusters. After Reconstruction ended in the South, a lot of people said, we're out of here. Well, St. Louis was one of the easiest places to get to. Kansas was kind of the dreamland in their mind. But they would get this far and have no money. And so he started an immigrant aid specifically for colored is the word they used in those days, but that was his thing. So he was very connected. Despite all of that, he got raided very frequently by the police. It shows up in the newspapers over and over and over again. Oh, there's gambling here. Oh, there was a fight. Oh, there was this and that. Now, I can't say that none of those things happened, but as I look through them, we've read through all the newspapers from that time, that doesn't come up a whole lot in other places. And if it's a person of color, they mention it in the newspaper, very clear about it. And we'll come back to the policing thing in a minute, but just kind of tuck that away. He prospered so well that in 1883, he was able to buy a piece of land in what is now the Ville on what was 4148 Lucky Street. I always say, if I ever write my book, that's going to be the title, with a little bit of, it's now called Aldine. It's a block north of Martin Luther King. And they built a house on this. Now, for a man of color in those days, 1880s, and he moved his now very elderly mother and his wife and his 3 kids into that house. And that family kept that house for 70 years, which in our research made it much easier for us because, here's this death certificate because Tyler, there are a lot of those. And every other girl in the 19th century was named Mary or Elizabeth, and then subsequently referred to as Molly or Liza or So having a steady address was really very helpful. He also had a partner, another man of color named Henry Bridgewater. His house is still standing on St. Louis Avenue. It's vacant. I just noticed last week they're putting a fence around it, so I'm hoping they're going to do something. I mean, it's, the windows are gone and that kind of stuff. But together, they founded the St. Louis Blackstockings. So when people talk about the Negro Leagues, which they deserve all the accolades they get, that was the second time. That was in the 1920s. There was a Negro League. They didn't call it that, but in the 1880s. And the St. Louis Blood, they were something else. They were in a lot of papers. They traveled. They had great players. They were known all over. And so, this is a man of some prominence. However, he got sick and died 1898. Sorry. 1893. And a newspaper a year later quotes that Matilda was placed into the colored insane asylum, which was on Arsenal. Yeah. I grew up right there, and we always called it the Nut House, so forgive me if that part of it is still there. But if you go farther, I guess, west towards Hampton, they're now the Ollie something houses. Anyway, there was a separate one for Black people. We think she probably wasn't insane, but she was grief-stricken, and she was getting close to 90 then, so it might have been Alzheimer's. They still had the house and money, so I don't think it was, they called it the colored poorhouse, but I think there was no place else. And she died there in 1901. And she, as I said, she had grandchildren, and they had some grandchildren. The last one, as far as we know, died in 1965. Now, most African Americans, when they do their genealogy, hit what's called the 1870 wall, because 1870 was the first census where African Americans were named if they were enslaved. Before that, they had been numbered and gendered. So they'd have males, 0 to 10, 11 to 20, and they just put hash marks, and then males and females like that. So it's very hard to get past that. I've always struggled with how to say this. If you were Catholic, there's an advantage. I don't want to make this sound too nice, but because of the tradition of St. Louis, which came from the French, the Code Noir, the Black laws, insisted that Catholics had to bring up their enslaved in the faith. So they were baptized, they got their first communions, they were confirmed, married, and buried. And all those records are intact. For the most part, there are some gaps, which has been a tremendous blessing, because a baptism will list parents and godparents. And you say, oh, this is probably that Elizabeth, since she's that age at this time. And this, oh, they were maybe cousins to these other, we have other families that we looked at, because they were there too. And it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, because this stuff is all over the place, and you try to put it together bit by bit. So if you're involved with anybody of color who's trying to do their genealogy, especially in St. Louis or New Orleans or Maryland, which were the Catholic places, I can't say it didn't happen other places, but I know for sure it was there. They might try that, and that helps get past that 1870 wall. And many of them, of course, would not be Catholic today. I'm amazed at how many are. I would have been. Free, I'm out of here, out of your church, but it's just a tremendous statement of faith to me that so many of the families, and being St. Louis, they're here still. We don't go anywhere. So a lot of them are still here. And of course, as we connect with them, they start, oh, those are cousins. Now it's, way, but, and so there is a group here trying to pull this all together for St. Louis. You may have heard of the GU 272. So I mentioned Georgetown in the beginning. As I say, the Jesuits came from Georgetown to St. Louis in 1823. In 1838, Georgetown was in big trouble financially. And they decided to get rid of the plantations, which meant selling the enslaved. And so they sold, there's more than 272, but that was the initial number that we knew. And so they sold them in 2 lots to plantations in Louisiana to do sugarcane, which is terrible work. They made the people that bought them sign that they would remain Catholic, they'd have access to a priest, and that they wouldn't break up families. Now you're in the back bayous of Louisiana, you can imagine. Although there are places there where there's still descendants of us. So if you hear the term GU 272, it refers to that group. And the group of descendants today has labeled themselves the GU 272 descendants. So this has gone on in different parts of the country. Our thing has been mainly the middle United States, basically Alleghenies to Rockies, Canada to the Gulf. That our research, but we're connected with them and all of that's going together. Let me just, that makes sense? Is that, okay.
Did the St. Louis Jesuits sell?
I beg your pardon?
Did the St. Louis Jesuits sell slaves south as well?
We did not as a group like that. We did individually. We did break up families, not as a regular basis, but yeah, it was, and the Code Noir said you were not supposed to do that, but you know, when somebody dies and they have.
But not to the extent Georgetown did.
Not as a group like that. And we held slaves until the end of the Civil War. I mean, that Civil War, January of 1865, Missouri freed all the slaves. So, yeah, we kept them up to the very end. There are other families we've looked at. Our group is called Slavery, History, Memory, and Reconciliation, which is a big so slavery, yeah, the research, what went on, what happened. History, how did that fit in and come up to today? Memory, that's putting this out there, getting it into our institutions and to groups like y'all tonight. And reconciliation, and that by far is the hardest one. The question I was asked to answer, is it enough to simply acknowledge the fact and wait for reconciliation to occur? What do you think? No, I know that was a softball pitch to me or what. No, the answer is no, so there, we're done. No, of course not. And if you wonder about that, I would suggest rereading Dr. King's letter from Birmingham, where that word wait jumps out. And no, we can't wait, but we also can't be in charge. As we have contact, that was one of the things we struggled over, is how now we know who these living people are. Ding dong, hi, my people used to own your people. Can I come in? You know, how do you get that out there? And so we thought the best way was to craft a letter, and we showed it to all kinds of different people. And should we say this or this? And it took months, and we put it all together and sent it out and kind of held our breath. And the first lady who responded came in and said, all my friends told me not to answer this because it's some kind of scam. The one thing we had not thought of that people might see. I don't know how you get, this is not a scam, probably is a scam. So I don't know how, but that never occurred to us. So that was our first lesson in knowing what we don't know, or finding out what we don't know. But holding that open, I don't know what I don't know, but I know it. And so our approach has been to approach descendants. We have these huge binders. If you're in these families, here you are, everything we have on your family, going all the way back as far as we can. Some people have been fascinated by it. Some people, oh, that's interesting. We've gotten all kinds of reactions. Some people have said, until you're sending a check, I don't want to talk to you. Fair enough. That's way above my pay grade, but you get to be how you are. But, and that's where we found out a lot of these people are still Catholic, still connected to the church, in spite of all odds. But to say to them, now what? You can't say, here's what we're going to do for you. And I have resisted this from the very beginning. Oh, let's set up an endowed chair to study this. And if you want to do that, fine, but then don't count it. That's us. That's rewarding ourselves. Or we'll have this, conference in the fall. That's all fine. But, here's what we did for you. We're not doing anything for you anymore. We're asking you. We had one extended kin group, about 15 people, ranging from 30, and I think the oldest one was like 80 something. And we were talking for a pretty good hour, and she finally said, are you asking us what we think? And of course we were taking, that's how we started, and then one of the younger ones said, oh yeah, indeed what they're asking. Oh, she wasn't used to being asked what she thinks. And honoring her history and this, and my wonder, I hope one day someone walks in with an old shoebox full of photographs and there's Matilda Hawkins, but that's not up to me. That's somebody's got that someplace or not. But they have their stories, their oral stories from grandma and great grandma and all of that. So most people start with genealogy today and go back. We started back and came forward. And so, yeah. Oh my. I was going to go into the whole renew, develop, light, urban renewal, and information, but I think we're probably going to go to questions now. So, let me, just one more thing. I always told my students, I'm not the guy with the answers, I'm the guy with the questions, which frustrated them. What's the answer? I said, we're not doing, it's not a test, we're creating answers. And so I can definitely tell you, no, we shouldn't wait for reconciliation to occur. We need to be active in that. Now, one of the things we ran into in dealing with, a large number of different people is different traditions and how they hear that word reconciliation. One of the fellows from St. Louis U, African American, he was assistant president or whatever it is, vice president for diversity, said, I hate that word reconciliation. You don't get to tell. And I said, well, and I said, well, what do you hear when you hear that word? And he heard this kind of like, we're in court. What do we got to do to make this go away? How much? What's the check? How do we? And I said, see, the Catholic tradition is very, very different if you take it in the terms of the sacrament. I'm accusing myself of sin. And now it's open. I don't get to say what happens next, or here's what I will do, or I'll tell you when we're done, or any of that. And so I think we have to be careful, when we use words that we're all on the same page with that. But that's certainly our approach, is not, okay, step up, get in line. Now you don't bother us anymore. This thing's over. Absolutely. I don't know that it'll ever be over because of the long history of it. But if we can start making these, steps and start to be aware, that's why I was going to go into all these little things that happen around St. Louis, because almost everything in St. Louis County had a Black area at one time that was taken by hook or by crook. And we don't know that. We don't know those stories. I had a hard time digging. So, Meacham Park, yeah, that's very well done. Some others, speaking of St. Louis University, a little place called Mill Creek Valley, which in 1959 was going to be renewed. 20,000 people lived in the area between Grand and Jefferson and Olive and the railroad tracks that are now next to 40, which they put through Mill Creek Valley. And they said, oh, we'll move all these people out because they're living in just slum conditions. Well, why were they? The trash wasn't being picked up. I lived in South St. Louis. My trash got picked up 3 times a week. The sewers, there were no sewers. Well, we had sewer. So and then, but we have to make sure they go someplace. But they probably will. There were rules about that. They were not followed. Or they said, you know what? We got this place down the road here called Pruitt-Igoe. You'll love that. I think we're all old enough to, yeah, okay. I find, there's a line in there somewhere, maybe in the 40s, where people go, what's Pruitt-Igoe? What's that? And a big promoter of that was St. Louis University. And they needed the money to buy that land that's there, and they turned to a very generous woman named Harriet Fordyce, who gave them $1 million to buy that land on 2 conditions. You see, that land is where a little thing called the Camp Jackson affair occurred at the beginning of the Civil War. A Confederate militia had camped, it was way on the outskirts of St. Louis in those days, had camped right there at the corner of Lindell and Olive, or Lindell and Grand. And the Union forces were at the Arsenal. That's why Arsenal Street goes, it ends in the Arsenal. Under General Nathaniel Lyons, marched out and captured them without firing a shot. General Frost, who was in charge of the Confederate militia there, surrendered, and they were the idea that St. Louis would go Confederate was ended at that point. Well, General Frost had a daughter named Harriet, who married a man named Fordyce. So Harriet Fordyce had 2 conditions. 1, you name it the Frost campus, and 2, you get rid of that statue of Nathaniel Lyons that was on the corner of Grand and West Pine. The victorious Union general. And they complied with both. What do we owe? We cannot, I don't think we, and I'm speaking for white people, can answer that. We can ask it. But openness, and that's why when people, you know, I hate that, I know what the initial CRT stand for, which has nothing to do with putting voices into junior history classes, but that's the stick that they're going to beat us with. So I think that's one thing we can do. They say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? That's not what's happening here. And again, think of it, how about women's voices? How about, you know, voices, oh yeah, we should, oh sure, there were women there, I guess there were, and yeah, maybe a little less contentious, at least in some circles. But we become somehow ambassadors for this. You know, there was this place called whatever, in where we live now, or near where we live. And it was, and what's your biggest asset for most people? Your house. Lost, gone. Generational wealth, forget about it. And it didn't have to burn down by, you know, people wearing hoods for that to happen. It happened by boards and by corporations. And there's 91 metropolitan areas in St. Louis. And most of the African American areas were unincorporated. So they didn't have the police. That was the whole thing. Years ago, a student told me, well, my dad says if you drive through Meacham Park, you get shot and killed. I said, oh, really? How does he know that? Well, he's driven through there. I said, oh, I'm very sorry. He said, why? I said, well, your father's dead. Well, no, he's not. I said, but you said if he drives, and he did, and he's not. And I live in the Ville. And, well, nobody lives there. Said, really? I see people all the time. Oh, well, white people, that's, I do. That kind of thing. It just, you're St. Louis and you know about city, county, rich, poor, all the rest of it. This is my problem is I talk too much.
We're very grateful for your willingness to speak with us tonight and to remind us of the inequities that persist in our community as legacies of enslavement.
I can hardly hear you, dear. Can you speak up?
I don't have a microphone.
They're both over here.
While they're doing that, if you want to know more, there's a book. It's a little hard going in the beginning, but I hang in there. And I put some others. These are all St. Louis. This is pretty, I mean, it's mostly photographs, but it's Black St. Louis, Black American Disappearance. I lent this book out to somebody, so I just brought a picture of it. It's called Mapping Decline. This is very technical, but it shows how St. Louis, you know, I didn't even get into redlining and steering and all that, but you can look all that up. And that is very clear about it. And that same man recently published a book called Citizen Brown, which focuses on Meacham Park and a place called Elmwood Park, which was up in Olivet. But it stands in, and he does a lot of the history of St. Louis. So these are all very specific St. Louis. And this one I just loved to death. It came out a year or so ago. The Last Children of Mill Creek. This woman is still alive. Yeah, and it's just wonderful. It was not a big, I mean, they were poor people, but my grandmother, they were very poor. They had to lean out the window to look at the church all the time. But nobody came and cleared their area. So anyway, there's a lot of great stories, and I'm sure there are many more. I also I brought some of our cards, if you'd like to contact us, or if you know somebody that might be interested in their own genealogy or connection, you can grab one of those. And we have a website, Matilda's whole story, I condensed it. And other families, there's the Chauvin family, which is absolutely incredible, and they have living descendants today. So.
You have to turn it on the red button.
It's just, it's
on the
very,
bottom.
Hello?
it's not obvious.
Oh, no. Okay, is this better? No. No? Yes. Okay.
Comes and goes.
Okay, so we reserved a few minutes anyway for Father to answer your questions. If you have a question, please come to the microphone in the aisle. And for those who are viewing online, please use the chat box. A quick reminder, As an audience of informed, engaged people, many of us have our own ideas on tonight's topic. There will be plenty of time afterwards to exchange our thoughts with each other, but we have only a few minutes to hear from Father Harrison. So when you come to the mic, please limit yourself to approximately 2 sentences and be sure the last sentence ends with a question mark.
I would be happy to stay. I don't have it.
Father, I have a question about how you see the relationship between reconciliation and reparations.
Yeah, it's too easy to say that's above my pay grade,
Yeah.
but it is. We are trying to feed the, people say to me, what do descendants want? And I say, which one? There's not this big, huge flock. And so what we are trying to do is just to gather the information, connect with descendants, put this into our institutions and feed that kind of up the line. So the Jesuits have started with, it's got a very long, it's got reconciliation in it anyway. It's a foundation and we have pledged $100 million and put descendants in charge. We're on the board, but we do not control it. Now, as soon as you start talking money, it seemed to be, they haven't distributed it yet. We only gave outright 15, we're raising the other 5. So they want to put it into elder care and education. But there are other people that don't want. So there was an article in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago that went into this rather deeply. But so that's one thing that is happening. So I wish I had a stronger answer, but it literally, we're trying to give them the information to make those kind of decisions. Especially this is a descendant. We can say that. And in this, well, I always find reading these articles is kind of interesting, but reading the comments really opens you up. People are furious that a private group is using its own money to give to people that they harm. I don't know if they're just, oh, they're going to come for me next. I don't know what it is, but how dare they? And there's a lot of that.
This is from online. When the St. Louis University Jesuits freed slaves at the end of the Civil War, the university provided financial assistance to start their new lives.
There were very few at that point. Many of them had, if you joined the Union Army, you were automatically freed. So some of the Chevans did that. There is a note we found, right? They knew that Missouri was going to declare freedom in January. And they said, let's sign contracts with the remaining enslaved. Now, I think you could read that 2 ways. In other words, let's get them nailed down, or let's ensure we don't know. We know one guy stayed with them the rest of his life. He only died in 1907. But there were actually there were never a great number at any one time, maybe 170 over that period, and that would include Louisiana and Kentucky. So, yeah. Yes.
Thank you, this is fascinating. Are there any, there are other universities also struggling with this?
Yes,
Harvard
indeed,
recently
yes.
came out, as you mentioned, Georgetown. Are there any models of how other places have addressed this issue that your group might take inspiration from?
We're in contact with them, and corporations are doing it, insurance firms, all, in 1860, 2/3 of the federal budget came directly from slavery. So if you had a post office in Minnesota, you benefited from slavery. If they put a road in, if the government did anything in any part of the country, a lot of that came from slavery. So that's one thing, is to try to get people to realize you're in this, whether your family's here or not. And as much as we hail, anytime we, a few years ago, St. Louis, 1818 and all of this kind of stuff, we need to mention this other stuff too. I don't think we have to hit people over the head, but the Archdiocese is starting to come to that. They put some of that in the St. Louis Review when they do some historical articles and things. And I think that's a good first step. I'm a Jesuit, so I'm going to brag a little bit. I think we have a gift to offer, which is that approach that we are not defendants in court, we are penitents at the altar. And that we have to endure this shame, this sin, to get through. St. Ignatius, who founded the Jesuits, did a thing called the spiritual exercises. It's a 30-day retreat. The whole first week is on sin, because until you face your sin, you can't do the next step. You don't get stuck there. It's a lot like any 12-step program. You got to look in the face, and you got to say, this is what's wrong, and this is what I did. But I don't stop there. I go on. So, you know, some schools, slightly outside of Boston, have set up fellowships and things like that. I can't tell them what to do and have no intention of telling. They have also pledged $100 million. Their assets, I think, are being more than ours. But, at any rate, but I do think we have a unique gift to give, and that we come. I can't literally get on my knees. I could, but I couldn't get back up. But we come on our knees, asking forgiveness and saying we have sinned, and we want, you know, can you talk to us? You never demand forgiveness. Don't even ask for forgiveness. If people want to extend that, that's fine. But we're connected. Dr. King pointed out, this hurts white people every bit as much as African Americans.
Judy is curious how religious people justified slavery themselves.
Yeah, well, it's in the Bible, you know, and again, as you know, if you want something, find it in the Bible, pull it out, roll it up real tight, and beat somebody with it. And you can always do that, whatever your thing is, as long as you don't read the whole Bible. So yeah, that was a big part of it. Unfortunately, a lot of the abolitionists in the United States was anti-Catholic. So to put in with them, because they were also anti-immigrant for the most part, and they saw it as a foreign church and all of this kind of stuff. So we did have a few Jesuits who spoke out against this, but not nearly. You know, I always compare, I always say, what's 100 years from now, what will they say about us? And I use the example of cars. We all know on some level, this isn't gonna, you know, but we're kind of hoping they figure it out. But 100 years from now, when, you know, your grandchildren, great-grandchildren are standing on top of the Rockies surrounded by water, what? You drove cars? And how deep is that in our economy? And if we got rid of cars tomorrow, everything changes. That's how deep enslavement was. And I never want to make excuses for it, but it just, it comes in through glints and gleams that, yeah, this is not good, and we shouldn't treat people like this, but what to do? The whole country faced that problem. And I wish we had at least dealt with it instead of selling into the system or waiting it out or whatever. I wish I had a better answer for that.
Nell wants to know, since we took away housing, providing attainable housing would be a priority in reparations. Has that been a part of the solution?
Again, that's, you know, municipalities and things like that. That's kind of out of my own thing. But yeah, and that came up from the very beginning. Like in this Elmwood Park, they said, well, we'll tear down half of it, and then those people can move into when we build it up, and then we'll tear down their half and redo, you know, and that never happened. They let other industries and things come into that area. And then these people who thought they were going to move, their houses fell apart because they weren't, you know, why would I put money into this? Well, we're going to move. And again, that happened in different ways in different parts. But that's absolutely, and I live on the north side. I drive by empty block after empty block, and you know, buildings that are crumbling. That when I lived there from '96 to '07, that still had people in them. So that's not that long ago. I'm not a builder. I don't know how much it would take, but it would take something to do that. And unfortunately, as I understand it, developers, they want a whole block. They don't want to fill in, you know, here's every other house or something. I don't know that that's an absolute, but affordable housing just in general, my gosh. Now I'm also hoping, I'll say this is being recorded, right? Mm-hmm. The Archdiocese is in the process of reassessing churches and parishes. And I suspect that's going to leave us with a whole lot of empty property on the north side. And again, I'm not a builder. I don't know what it would take, but I've seen old public schools that have been turned into condos and things. That's just me talking off the top. Yeah. The other thing I would like to see for reparations is that we open some credit unions, especially on the north side, and get rid of these check places with the 20% a week and all that. So I have no idea how that would work, but think those are some critical needs.
I went to school with the children from Elmwood Park.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so this is living memory. That's what I'm trying to bring up. This has not happened years and years ago.
Right. Sharon Sharon says, my mother was raised in Mill Creek from the 20s to the 40s. Do you think any of those families will ever get reparations for the property lost?
From the city of St. Louis? No, I do
I'm
not
not
say.
sure where, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was the city basically with federal funds, of course. But then the idea was, well, we built this nice crude angle for you and you wrecked it. I mean, that's the narrative, you know. We had this nice place and you wrecked it, so I don't see a lot of incentive in the city to spend money on that. And, you know, so much of that is still empty. It was supposed to be filled with houses and things and businesses. They tore down 20 churches in that area. So, yes.
I was just thinking about,
Because the Zoom.
I was just thinking about Desmond Tutu and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that he established. And it's a very public kind of thing. And I was wondering if you all have thought of anything of a public nature.
Well, we certainly hope, right before COVID, the Archdiocese invited African Americans to speak their truths, and people who had been denied communion in church and just treated very badly in many other ways spoke. And there were, I forget what, 5, 6 bishops there. So,
I was there.
oh, well, you saw how powerful that was. And I think we need more of that. That's a sense of that, and that to hear that history. I didn't talk about St. Elizabeth's, but there was a colored parish called St. Elizabeth's. And no matter where you lived as an African American, if you were Catholic, except that you had to go to St. Elizabeth's, which was a Jesuit church. And in 1927, they got a piece of property at Cook and Taylor and wanted to build a school there for the African American kids. And the neighborhood went nuts, and they met at the Catholic Church visitation at that time. And we have all their names and addresses, 400 Catholics who signed this thing saying, oh no, we have nothing against African Americans, but we think they're happier. Well, they didn't even go that, they're happier with them, their own, and it just wouldn't be, you know, helpful. Well, then the Depression came and that killed that. But I often wanted to contact their descendants and say, hey, guess what grandma or great grandpa signed in 1927? And not to beat them with it. That's the kids go, you hate white people. I know my mother's a white person. But we got George Washington, then yeah, slaves. We gotta have to do both.
There's a couple other questions that just popped in. Oh, go ahead, Barbara.
Can I ask one question? Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope, you may have already discussed this, and I didn't catch everything you said, but are you aware of, what do you know about the curriculum that's happening in the Catholic schools, K through 12, in terms of teaching what we would consider real history? Because the public schools are terrifying with this. So can you address that?
What do I know directly?
Well, you know.
Very little, very little. I just came back from Belize in August.
Oh.
And so I haven't been, you know, in that level of it. I know on the Jesuit side, we are trying to get in there. We've contacted our schools. One of the things we've tried to do is change February, Black History Month, with all due respect to, Mrs. Parks and Dr. King and the Peanut. The kids have been hearing this since 2nd grade. Get out your yearbooks. When was the first person of color here? How long was she or he here? You know, where do you live? Where, you know, why do people, what's your street like? And try to get them, you know, this is your African American History Month, not just Black people, it belongs to all of us. And to do some of that self thing. And I certainly don't want to lose all the rest of it, but Martin Luther King said a lot more things than I have agreed. And some of it was pretty, you know, Jesus harsh. Is that Jesus was always good, he wasn't always nice. And Dr. King put it out there. So yeah, I know the Sacred Heart Sisters are doing the visitation. Almost all the sisters groups, the exception of St. Joseph Rondelet, had enslaved persons. And so they're doing studies on their own. The Archdiocese and we have a group called Cross, which is There's so many of these. Catholics researching, no, Catholic religious organizations studying slavery. So it's different dioceses, a lot of them in the South, because there's more Catholics in Louisiana than there are in Alabama. That kind of thing. So it's a leavening process, I think. But I couldn't, I'm just not connected. I'm happy to go, if you're connected to a school and you want somebody to talk or somebody to get in real trouble, I'm happy to come. And do that. But we're just, COVID really hit us in the getting out there, because we had just piled up a lot of this stuff. And okay, now we can, even, with the descendants, we haven't been able to have it. I want to get a big tent, and the barbecue and all that and have them all together, but we haven't been able to do that.
Let's see. Who says this? Susie says, my heart hurts when I think about these sad things that have happened. What can I do for this hurt, both mentally for myself and to do something for this injustice?
There's an old story about the American who's traveling in Ireland. And if you've ever traveled in Ireland, you'll believe this, he got lost. And so he sees a guy by the side of the road and he goes over to him and says, can you tell me how to get to Killarney? He says, well, I wouldn't be starting from here. So Susie, start where you are. So I have no idea how old you are or what your connection is or where you are. Read about the histories. If you know other people or if you're a teacher or whatever, but wherever you are, that's where you start. And we're not going to change it overnight. It didn't happen overnight. We're not going to do it all in our lifetimes, but you'll widen your circle. You get someone else who's interested. You contact, if your kid's in school, ask the school, what are you doing about this? Go up, I am not teaching anymore. In some ways, I'm kind of glad when you watch these board meetings and things and some of this stuff. But we got to do that. These kids, they aren't stupid. They've got the internet. They know, they can look this stuff up. And there's going to be a backlash against this, I think, on all these levels. They're not going to go back to beating up the gay kid. I think that's not going to happen. So I know that's not very specific, Sissy, but yeah, start where you are and educate yourself and talk to people and what can I do? What is to say, if you have a kid in school or you're connected in some way, start there.
Thank you. And Joyce would like you to mention the June 18th prayer at the Old Cathedral.
Yeah, the Archdiocese is sponsoring this. They're using a Kiswahili word, which always, okay, I mean, how many of you speak Kiswahili? Yeah, but okay, they're borrowing it. It's Mafa, and it's truth. And so they're going to have this June 18th, is that it?
What it says.
Okay,
That's
yeah.
what she says.
It's going to start at the Old Cathedral, and I haven't seen the thing yet.
9 to noon.
9 to noon, but they're going to make a pilgrimage to some stops. I imagine the old courthouse. That's what people were sold on the steps. Lynch's slave pen is where Bush Stadium. I don't know where they're going, but there's certainly places there. And I'm giving a talk at some point, or I'm not sure what it is, but some point in front of the Archbishop. So we'll see how that works. But he's a nice guy, I'm sure. I just have never met him. Jesuits try to keep our distance from the authorities. It often doesn't turn out well for us. We got suppressed in 1763 by the Pope for about 30 years. So we don't want to bring that on. So maybe you guys could, I gave.
Where can we find information about that?
You have the flyer.
Okay.
I don't know if you can put that into your own information or whatever, but yeah. I don't want to keep you, but I'm not tired. Thank you for the good work you're doing. I understand it's not just learning, it's getting out there and doing stuff. So.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you.
Very well. And as I say, if you have some other group or some other thing I can honor, I'd be happy to.